Hello and welcome. This is Jim Coppin with Rankin Technical College. Today I wanted to give you a very quick introduction to JavaScript. So for this course, the first half of this course is pretty much HTML, CSS, the second half is JavaScript. But your book, the HTML, CSS book we're using, introduces JavaScript. And so we're just going to kind of touch upon JavaScript a little. We're going to, obviously, the second half of the course, we're going to get into it much more, but I wanted to kind of give you a quick introduction, okay? So, as we know, HTML, we've been working with HTML and CSS. HTML provides structure and content for your web page, right? It defines elements such as headings, paragraphs, lists, images, forms. And you think of it as being the skeleton and basic building blocks of your page. Whereas Cascading Style Sheet, on the other hand, handles presentation and styling, right? It controls how the HTML elements look, including colors, fonts, layout, spacing, responsiveness, etc., right? It's what makes your page visually appealing. Now, JavaScript will adds interactivity and dynamic behavior to your web page. So it will respond to certain user actions like clicking on something, mousing over something, form submissions, etc. You can fetch data from the server, create animations, all kinds of options and variations on what it can do. Okay, you think of it as the muscles and the nervous system that brings your page to life. Okay. So JavaScript is a versatile and powerful scripting language or programming language that adds interactivity and dynamic behavior to your web pages. It's an essential technology for front-end web development alongside HTML, CSS to create rich user experiences. Now, once again, we said front-end web development. Always think of front-end web development being within your browser, right? There's both front-end web development that takes place in your browser, and that's technologies such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then there's also what's called back-end services, right? So there's back-end technologies that run on a server. And them can be different programming languages, right? And, I know that this is an introduction, and so a lot of you don't have any experience in any of the other programming languages, but there's lots of other programming languages that can be used on the server side, such as C++, which is or C Sharp, I was going to say, C Sharp or C++. There's what's called Java. Don't mistake that with JavaScript. Java is a separate programming language. There's Python. There's many others. Okay, some of those run on the server side. Okay. Now I do want to mention originally, and I think it goes into that a little bit here in the coming up here. But JavaScript was always at the beginning. It was always a scripting language. Okay, that's used on the front end, right, on the client side. But there's an introduction. There was a new technology that came along, a new framework called Node.js that kind of took the JavaScript and actually can now use that on the back end, which on the server side. Okay. Now we're not going to be covering too much of Node within this class. You might learn a little bit about Node towards the end of this course. But for the most part, we're concentrating more on the front end in this course, the client side. So we'll be looking at it from the, from that perspective, so to speak, right? So JavaScript was created at Netscape Communications Corporation. So Netscape used to be there used to be one of the earlier browsers, before Chrome days, before Edge, before a lot of these, was Netscape Navigator, and it was kind of one of the first ones. Okay, so there was Brendan Eich at Netscape when they created back in 1995. He came up with this language that can do some other things besides just the basic HTML and CSS. And even back in these days, you have to think the HTML was very HTML was very, it was a different version. You couldn't do much with it. There, HTML and CSS has really expanded as far as functionality and what you could do, right? It's really just very bare bone type stuff. And so was the JavaScript that was created back then as well, okay? So, but originally JavaScript was named Mocha, okay? And then it was later renamed LiveScript, and then finally they renamed it JavaScript. So, the rapid adoption of Netscape Navigator led to the widespread use of JavaScript, quickly establishing it as a dominant scripting language for the web. Okay, and they're just kind of talking about the ECMA script standardization specifications. We'll get into this much more in the second half of the course. Don't want to, just kind of want to do a quick introduction here, like I said, just so you can have a little background for your assignments for this week. Let's talk about the JavaScript engine. So within the browser, okay, within every browser, there's a JavaScript engine, which is a program that interprets and executes that JavaScript code. Okay, different web browsers use different JavaScript engines. One of the most well-known and influential engines is called V8, which was developed by Google for the Chrome browser. Okay, it's also used in some other browsers as well. And also, as far as if you ever hear of Node.js, I mentioned it earlier, but Node.js actually that runs on the server side. We were talking about how JavaScript can be run on the server side, but mostly it's really for front-end development. But that Node.js that runs on that server side actually uses that V8 JavaScript engine on that server side, okay? Which is kind of what Google Chrome did. What Google did with their Chrome is they created a platform, so to speak, a framework, which was called Chromium, and they open sourced it, which means they made it available to anybody. So anybody could grab that, take that. You know, you and I, we could go create our own browser, right? But honestly, it's very, very complicated. Even large companies, it's very complicated for them who have hundreds and hundreds of people that can work on it, right? It's very complicated. But Google did make it open source, and it can be used where you can just use parts of that. And that's what the Node.js framework, what they actually did, is they used just that JavaScript engine, okay? We don't need to get too far into that. But V8, let's just see. V8 is an open source and is also used in Node.js, popular JavaScript runtime environment. This means that JavaScript code can be executed not only in the browser, but also on the server, like we said. The success of V8 has pushed other browser vendors to improve their own JavaScript engines, leading to a general increase in JavaScript performance across the web. Okay. So in recent times, recent years, you know, it's a lot more performant. The performance is a lot better on these JavaScript engines. Okay. Let's talk about interpreted versus compiled code. You might hear the terms interpreted and compiled in the context of programming. An interpreted language, in interpreted language, the code is run from top to bottom. You know, first line, the second line, it just runs it one right after another, right? And then the result of that is immediately returned. You don't have to transform the code into a different form because the browser runs it, okay? The code received in the programmer-friendly text form and processed directly from that. That's considered interpreted language. Line by line, there's what's called an interpreter. An interpreter runs, it interprets it, and it just returns it, right? Now, a compiled language, okay? A compiled language, on the other hand, are transformed into another form before they are run by the computer. For example, like C, C++, a C#, which we'll learn that one. There's also what's called a Java. Like I said, don't mistake that with JavaScript. Actually, the reason they called it JavaScript was because Java was becoming very popular at the time, and they kind of piggybacked on Java's popularity, and they called it JavaScript. It kind of helped elevate the popularity of JavaScript as well, because they kind of had that same name in there. So, but Java's a separate programming language. It's a compiled language. It's one of the compiled ones, okay? whereas JavaScript really isn't a compiled language, right? It's an interpreted language. But for these other programming languages, they have to be transformed. They have to be transformed in a different form so the computer can run them. Okay. So for example, C, in this case, C++, plus the other ones I mentioned, are compiled into machine code and then run on the computer. So I'm sure, like on your computer, you've had some kind of a programming. If you let's say you go to your desktop and there you have some maybe little game that you run or any kind of little application. When you double click that, even like Microsoft Word or anything, even Chrome by itself is an executable, right? So when you double click like anything, usually in a Windows environment, and I'm talking about not within a browser environment, but like an application that's running on an application that's on your computer. So like, a lot of things you probably have on your desktop. When you open something up, that's an executable, right? And most, I don't want to say 100% of the time, but most of the time, the things that you would execute there when you double click on something to open it up, that's an executable. Usually that's a compiled program that's been compiled from some language or another, right? It's compiled, it's all packaged together, so that provides some functionality to the user. Okay. And that's why it has to be transformed from one to another so it can run on the computer. JavaScript is a lightweight interpreted programming language, like we said. The web browser receives the JavaScript code in its original text form and runs that script from that. From a technical standpoint, most modern JavaScript interpreters actually use a technique called just-in-time compiling. So even though we said JavaScript's an interpreted language, over time things have evolved, whereas the browser will actually automatically actually take some, like if there's some JavaScript that's going to be used a lot, it's I don't want to confuse you. It's kind of a complex thing where it'll actually compile parts of that little JavaScript so it can be used, but still JavaScript still is still considered an interpreted language. Okay, so just always keep that in mind. If you're asked that, yes, it's an interpreted language. But like I said, most modern JavaScript interpreters actually use a technique called just-in-time compiling to improve performance. And the JavaScript code gets compiled to a faster binary format while the script is being used, okay? And it's basically run so it could run as quickly as possible, okay? However, JavaScript is still considered an interpreted language since the compilation is handled at runtime rather than ahead of time, okay? So yeah, the compilation happens is when it's being executed, it kind of does that, when it's being executed. Whereas I was talking about your desktop and having some apps on your desktop, that is already compiled and packaged application. When you double click that, it just executes, period, right? It's already been compiled and packaged. Whereas here, it was talking about JavaScript using the just-in-time compiling, it actually happens at runtime, okay? Now, I know some of this stuff might be kind of a little hard to understand. Just bear with me. Just want to kind of give you a little quick introduction. I know you're not going to understand all of this. Maybe just, you find some little pieces of knowledge that stick there. And as we move forward, more and more you'll understand more and more of it, okay? So what type of language is JavaScript? JavaScript is dynamically typed, interpreted, and proto-based scripting language, okay? So dynamically typed means in JavaScript, the type of variable is determined at runtime, okay? During compilation, that means you don't need to explicitly declare the data type of variable. So what that means is, let's just say in JavaScript, you can, JavaScript function can hold on some data, maybe like a number, right? Or a string, right? A number or a string. And it can hold on to that and it can use that. But you don't have to say, hey, this is a number I'm storing or this is a string I'm storing. Whereas other languages, since it's dynamically typed, now if it's called statically typed, a statically typed languages, like all those ones we were kind of that I mentioned that are on the server side, maybe C, C Sharp, C++, Java, others, you have to say, hey, this is, you have to tell the, before it can compile, right? The other ones were compiled languages. You have to tell them, hey, this is a string or this is a number, right? JavaScript, you don't have to do that. You can just assign that. You can create a variable, say x equals 5, and it's gonna treat that as a number, okay, in certain circumstances. But we don't have to get too far into that. But once we said, so that it's a dynamically typed, it's interpreted, okay, it's executed line by line by the JavaScript engine without being compiled into a separate executable file beforehand, okay? Even though we just mentioned that it can also use, the browser can sometimes compile your stuff behind the scenes, but it still happens at runtime and not prior to that. And some of these things we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about more in the future. But it's prototype based. JavaScript uses what's called prototype for inheritance. Let's not get into that too much. So once again, it's a scripting language. JavaScript is often used to script or automate tasks within a larger environment, such as a web page. It interacts with elements of a page, and elements of the page is considered a DOM to create dynamic and interactive experiences. Okay, I know that was a lot. Don't worry too much about that. Just kind of want to give you a little brief introduction. And I just didn't want to just start looking at some stuff without kind of telling you a little bit what JavaScript is, okay? Let's go ahead and look at just a little bit of code here because I want to show you some functionality here, help you understand a little more about it. Okay, so here's actually, I think, one of your assignments. I think this is the apply your knowledge for chapter 10. And it's going to ask you to create this function. Here's a JavaScript file. So in JavaScript and using JavaScript within your web pages, you have kind of different options. Okay. Now you can just use a script tag like this, and you can put your JavaScript right here. Okay. That's one option. Kind of just like we did for the CSS. We could use a style tag and put your style here. You can do the same thing for JavaScript as well. Now, if you put here, okay, if you put it here, all right, then it's going to execute this. If there's anything in here, it's going to load all this. If there's anything that needs to be executed on load, it's going to all happen before it loads your whole page, right? So if you have a lot of complex stuff going on a web page, it can actually slow down the rendering of it. And you like me as well, and many other people, I'm sure you've gone to a website, and if it doesn't happen awful quick, you're out of there, right? You close it, you move on to something else awful quickly, right? So that's kind of one of the downside with putting it right in here. Usually if you're going to do something, it's best to have just simple things here, okay? A lot of times one of the best ways to do it, and there's different ways, and I'm not going to get into everything just because I just really want you to have enough to get your assignments done. So that's one way. And then here, you can also put it towards the end of your body, okay? By doing this, and this is actually accessing it as an external file. Okay, it's in a different. It's outside of the HTML document here. Okay, now when you do it like this, this will actually load after all of the page loads. After everything loads in this page, then it'll go grab the JavaScript. So that way you can actually be seeing that page. Obviously, for simple little pages, it's going to be so quick, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, right? But anything that's complicated, and for best practices, it's kind of, that's why we don't want to just say, okay, well, since we don't have to worry about it because we've got simple things. Well, you get into a job somewhere or whatever, and you're dealing with something that's much more sophisticated, a very complex page, you need to really be thinking about performance and all those things, right? Because you don't want to have a website that you created and nobody's staying on it because it's taking too long to load, right? So you can go ahead and load it this way, right? And this is an external one. It's in a directory here. So we come over here. We have a scripts directory, and we have the scripts.js. So whenever you do a file, a JavaScript file, it always has to end in .js, right? .html for our HTML, .css for our styles, and for a JavaScript file, it has to end in .js, right? And it's always good to have them in separate directories, right? CSS in one, and your JavaScript in another, right? And then usually you just have your HTML in your root. But, there's different variations on that as well. But depends on how complex your directory structure is. So, and another thing on the script tag, we've seen different things for CSS. It's different than for JavaScript, right? So for a style sheet, you use this kind of a tag, right? You use a link, you use an href, right? Okay, you can't use you can't use a link tag or href on a JavaScript file. You have to do it. This is the syntax for that. You have to use a script tag with the source, okay, and make sure that's the right path. Obviously, within Visual Studio Code, it always helps you. You can start typing and it'll find it, right? If it don't start finding it, you got a problem, right? So it finds that, right? Okay. So, yep. And this could also be up here, okay? Different ways. Kind of pretty similar to what we, cascading style sheets in a way, right? So here you could actually, what did I do there? Let me see what I did. You could also put it up here as well. Okay, but once again, same thing like I spoke about earlier. So what's going to happen is it's going to load this JavaScript before it really loads the rest of this page, right? And like I said, in our case, it's probably not going to matter. You're not going to tell the difference. But anything complicated, it could make a big difference, right? So it's always best to go ahead and put that down here before your end body tag, right? Before your end body tag. Don't do it after your end body tag. Do it right before your end body tag, okay? And we just kind of get rid of that. It's not needed. All right. So over here, okay, this is the page. So let me show you. Okay, so the JavaScript file, here's the JavaScript file. Let me explain to what this is saying here, okay? This is creating a function, okay? JavaScript has functions. We're going to be doing some basic functions for this chapter 10 stuff. But here's a function called content. Make sure when you're doing this, this is what's called a kind of a traditional way to write a function. There's different ways, but we don't need to get too far ahead on that. So this is a function content. Make sure you got the open and close parentheses. And you also need to have the open and close curly braces. You have to have all your code in between there. Okay. Now this is basically, your book's going to walk you through this whole thing. This is the chapter 10 apply, right? But I'll explain what this is. Here, when you're doing this var, well, actually, you really shouldn't be using var anymore. That's kind of old school stuff. We'll talk about that more later. but we'll go ahead and leave that var there. But that's kind of old school, and we really don't want to use those anymore. We'll talk about that in the second half of this course. But here, what this document's a special object within the browser. Okay, it's called a document object. It's a window document object. Okay. And what it is, it's basically what's called the DOM, the document object model. Okay. So what happens is when you load your HTML page, you load this thing, it loads this whole page as a document object model. Okay. And so your JavaScript has access to all of these different elements within your document within the browser. Okay, so let me show you something here on that. So we're going to just do I'm going to do let me just do an F12 here. So here, this is what's called the document object model. Okay, as you see, you got these little arrows. These are called nodes. You have an HTML node, you have a head node, you have a body node. You can see it changing down here, div, right? So this is if you keep going down, it's going to keep adding to this, right? For HTML, it's basically the path of this header is all the way, right? This is the full path. But this is your document object model. And JavaScript can access anything in here, okay? So what we're doing here in this example, let's look at that JavaScript again. We're doing get element by ID. So what this is going to do, it's going to say, this is saying, let's use the document, from the document, which is the document object model, let's get an element by ID that has the ID new. So if we go over to this HTML, it's going to scan, it's going to find the ID new. Okay, it's going to find this ID new. Now notice there's nothing in here. There's nothing in here. It's pretty much empty, right? So there's nothing in here. And then it's not showing anything on the page. Well, you're not going to see, but it's not showing anything on the page for that area. I shouldn't have done that like that, but it's okay. But we're going to say, okay, we're going to take that. Now, this is a variable you come up with. You can call this whatever, right? Let me just change the name of this, just to show you that this can be, not test, new text, whatever you want it to call this, right? Probably should be like capital there. But wherever you did that, you're going to have to change this, all of these. Okay, but that's a variable. Okay, we're going to just leave it the way it was, but I'm just letting you know that that's a variable, okay, that you created. You say, okay, give me this and assign that to this. It's going to assign that whole element, right, that whole div, that whole element to this variable. Now it's saying, okay, let's take that variable, that element, and let's do text content. That's a special text content is a special JavaScript thing. Okay, that you don't create this. This is this is part of that document object model. Use this text content, and you can assign something to that. You can assign text to that. So in this case, we're going to do hi. I am a new paragraph that was created with a JavaScript function. It's also taking that element and it's putting a color there, and it's got a font size and everything else. Okay, so let's get back to this. So if I go ahead and click this, view new page content, there you go. When I click this, it's going to run this function. So let's look at that real quick before we get too far ahead. So button on click content, okay? This is how you invoked that function, okay? Now, if you did not, if you made a mistake, I'm just going to comment this out. So commenting something out here, you just do a control forward slash, right, to comment it out. I'm going to do save. Now, if I come over here and try to view the page content, it's not going to work, right? Because you're trying to run this function, it can't find it. It's not there, okay? Obviously, you have to have that imported, right? You have to have that there. Now, if I run it, there it is, okay? Now, really, but I just kind of want to show you this. Don't get confused by this too much. But if we go in here, so we're displaying that, right? Let's make this a little bigger. Let's just make this all big. So here's these elements. So if we go in here and where was our thing here? Oh, there you go. Okay, so actually put that in there. Okay, it put that in there. All of that. Even embeds the styles like that. I didn't know it kind of did that like that. I don't think it used to do that like that, but whatever. So it went ahead and put it, attached those styles and put that text. Okay. Now, obviously, it doesn't really put that in there. You know, this is just in browser memory, right? I hit refresh. Right? It's gone. Right? It's gone. So that's how the JavaScript engine, that's how things work within the browser, right? So when you click that, you interactively, dynamically created that, but you refresh your browser, it's back to the original state again, okay? And then you'd see that obviously it would be over here as well, right? Okay. So the important things to kind of remember here on this is it's always a good idea to pretty much have your script towards the end. I'll show you some other ways to do it as well, but not today. Kind of the second half of the course. But here's we want to kind of have this towards the end, because if you put it here at the beginning, if you put this here at the head section, or you just had your whole function within a script tag here, it's going to execute before the page executes. And there's going to be some other problems too. If you're acting on something on your page, like HTML, it's going to load that before it loads the HTML, and then it might not work as expected. Okay. And there's going to be some instances, I'll actually, in the future here, not today, you know, well, like I said, second half course, I'll show you some instances. If you kind of have things in the wrong place, it's not going to execute, because it's not going to find it until it's already there, right? It's got to be there first, the HTML. So like I said, you always have it down there. You have to use a script tag. You use a source tag. Make sure that you are accessing it in the right place. Like in this case, I started with script. There it is, right? We are accessing it using the name of the function. And in our case, we're doing a on-click event, what's called an on-click event. Has to be just like that. You spell something wrong. If you don't have it, like, you know, if you just do that, that's not going to work, okay? It has to be exactly like that, okay? Now, obviously, this name is whatever you want to call this, right? Let me see real quick. Right? If it's like that, I can change. I need to change this, right? So you can call this what you want, and the variable stuff you can call this what you want. But when you do that, you also have to change these as well. Okay, this is not a special Java, you know, internal thing, right? This document get element by ID. These are JavaScript internal properties and methods that are part of the JavaScript language. Text content is, style.color is, style.font size, okay? These are, you can't call these whatever you want. But in here, you can call the function whatever you want, okay? Obviously, whatever element by ID, whatever you change this in your code on your HTML, this just points to whatever ID you called it, right? This here is, whatever you decide, right? You decide the color, the font size, stuff like that, right? You don't even have to have this here at all, right? You can get rid of this completely. But the ones that, you have to make sure that you have correct is you can't be changing these around, right? Here you can, like I said, you call it text, but you're going to have to also change those. Important to have function just like that. Don't forget your open and closed parentheses, and don't forget your open and closed curly braces. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to cover here on that.